When we talk about a burning reaction, we usually mean combustion, a chemical process in which a fuel reacts with oxygen, releasing heat, light, and often gases like carbon dioxide and water vapor. For example, when you burn a piece of wood, the cellulose in the wood reacts with oxygen in the air. The reaction breaks chemical bonds in the fuel and forms new bonds in the products, releasing a large amount of energy as heat and visible light. That's why a campfire feels warm and glows brightly. Now imagine life itself as a kind of flame. What does that mean? Well, life constantly consumes fuel, like food, and oxygen to release energy, just like a fire consumes wood and air. In our cells, this burning happens through a process called cellular respiration. Instead of roaring flames, it's a controlled set of chemical reactions in microscopic power plants called mitochondria. These convert sugars and fats into usable energy molecules called ATP. Without this constant energy release, just as a flame goes out when it runs out of fuel, a living organism would stop functioning. But isn't there a big difference between a flame and a living being? Yes and no. A flame is an open chemical reaction, while life's flame is enclosed and regulated. In both cases, fuel and oxygen are essential. For example, think about running up a hill. You start breathing faster to bring in more oxygen, just like blowing on a campfire makes it burn hotter. This parallel shows that the same basic chemistry powers both a burning log and your own muscles in action. What about waste products? In a campfire, ash, smoke, and gases are released. In us, carbon dioxide and water are the main outputs. We even exhale warm air, a bit like the heat that radiates from burning wood. The key difference is that life uses complex enzymes and biological pathways to capture and store energy efficiently before letting the rest escape as heat, while a flame releases almost all its energy instantly as heat and light. So here's the thought. If life is like a flame, does that mean it's temporary by nature? In one sense, yes. It needs constant fuel and oxygen, and when those stop, so does the process. But unlike a campfire, life has evolved ways to sustain itself for decades by repairing, adapting, and reproducing, passing on the flame to new generations. In this way, life's fire can burn far beyond the lifespan of any single individual. Combustion is a chemical reaction between a fuel and an oxidizing agent, usually oxygen, that releases heat and light. At the molecular level, bonds in the fuel molecules break and reform into more stable products, such as carbon dioxide and water. This process is exothermic, meaning it releases more energy than it consumes. The energy manifests as both thermal energy and electromagnetic radiation, visible light. Combustion can occur rapidly, as in flames, or slowly, as in smoldering processes. A candle's wax burns in oxygen, producing a steady flame. Combustion is like shaking hands with someone and, in the process, releasing fireworks. For a burning reaction to start, the reactants must overcome an initial energy barrier called activation energy. This is typically provided by heat, a spark, or compression. Once this threshold is reached, the reaction becomes self-sustaining because the energy released is enough to ignite more fuel molecules. The rate of ignition depends on factors such as temperature, pressure, and fuel composition. If insufficient energy is supplied, combustion will not occur despite the presence of fuel and oxygen. Striking a match head against a rough surface generates heat that ignites the chemicals. Ignition is like pushing a ball over a hill so it can roll down on its own. In a flame, oxidation reactions occur rapidly at high temperatures, turning hydrocarbons into carbon dioxide and water. The chemical bonds in the products are more stable than in the reactants, which is why energy is released. Electrons rearrange during this process, releasing photons that we see as visible light. The heat generated further excites nearby molecules, sustaining the reaction. This continuous energy feedback creates the self-perpetuating nature of flames. Gasoline burning in a car engine releases both heat and mechanical work. Oxidation in a flame is like a chain of people passing buckets, each person adding speed to the process. A flame is not uniform. It has distinct regions with different temperatures and chemical compositions. The inner zone is often cooler and contains unburned fuel vapors. Surrounding it is the hotter reaction zone where active combustion takes place. The outer cone is where complete combustion occurs, producing the brightest light. These layers are shaped by convection currents and the diffusion of oxygen into the flame. The Bunsen burner flame has a blue inner cone and a nearly invisible outer cone. A flame structure is like the layers of an onion, each with its own role in the process. Biological systems generate energy through controlled oxidation of organic molecules, a process called cellular respiration. Instead of releasing all energy at once as in a fire, cells capture energy in chemical carriers like ATP. Oxygen is still the final electron acceptor, just as in burning, but the process is highly regulated by enzymes. This slower, stepwise oxidation prevents destructive heat release and maximizes usable energy. Without oxygen, many organisms switch to less efficient anaerobic pathways. Human muscle cells oxidize glucose to produce energy for contraction. Cellular respiration is like burning fuel in a well-tuned engine instead of an open bonfire. A flame begins small, grows as it consumes available fuel, and eventually diminishes when resources are depleted. Similarly, living organisms start from small beginnings, grow during periods of abundant energy, and decline when resources or internal systems fail. In both, external conditions such as temperature, oxygen supply, and environment influence the rate of change. The end comes when sustaining processes stop, whether by extinguishing or biological death. This parallel highlights the transient nature of both fire and life. A campfire flares up with fresh logs, but dies down when the wood is gone. Life and flames both resemble a feast that eventually runs out of food. Both burning and living processes follow the second law of thermodynamics, increasing overall entropy. In combustion, chemical energy is dispersed as heat and radiation into the surroundings. In life, ordered molecules are constantly broken down, releasing energy and producing waste products. Maintenance of low entropy states in organisms requires continuous energy input. Just as a flame needs a steady fuel supply, when energy input stops, disorder quickly increases, and the system ceases its organized activity. A candle left unlit stays ordered. When lit, wax and oxygen transform into dispersed heat and gases. Entropy in life and fire is like a tidy room that naturally becomes messy unless energy is spent to keep it clean. Combustion is a self-propagating chain reaction. Heat from one step triggers the next. Similarly, life sustains itself through feedback loops such as metabolism, reproduction, and repair. In a flame, radicals such as H, O, and O speed up the chemical process. Much like enzymes accelerate metabolic reactions, both systems rely on intermediate species that keep the process running without external continuous ignition. Interruption of these intermediates leads to collapse of the system. A wildfire spreads as burning trees ignite others nearby. Self-propagation is like a rumor spreading from person to person without needing to be told again by the original source. Throughout history, fire has symbolized vitality, passion, and the soul because its behavior mirrors living systems. Flames respond to their environment, require nourishment, and have a finite lifespan. Scientifically, both fire and life are far from equilibrium systems that maintain order by consuming energy and exporting disorder. This commonality makes life as a flame more than a poetic metaphor. It reflects shared physical principles. Understanding this link bridges chemistry, biology, and philosophy. Ancient Greeks saw the flame of an oil lamp as representing the human spirit. Fire and life are like two dancers moving to the same invisible rhythm of physics and chemistry.